Joe Biden takes the oath of office at noon on January 20th. He will, of course, take over a deeply divided country facing immense challenges that have only grown worse over the past 4 years, and particularly over this past year. Some of those challenges will take significant time and effort to tackle, but there's actually a lot that Biden can do starting on day one, whether or not Republicans maintain control of the Senate. And the speed at which he acts will matter too. Writer David Roberts of Vox says the way for Biden to succeed in this hyper-polarized environment is to run a blitz where he does everything at once, because the only thing Biden will have real control over is his administration and what it does, and his North Star, his organizing principle, should be doing as much good on as many fronts as fast as possible. This is one area where Biden can actually learn from Trump's example, Roberts says, by constantly acting, being on the offensive, generating news stories and controversies. Trump simply overwhelmed the ability of the system, fasten on any one thing. The idea is to take on everything quickly and boldly, knowing some of it won't work. You'll take hits, you'll get backlash. But at the end of the day, all that matters is what gets done, put on paper and into law. The rest is vapor. I'm joined now by the author of that piece, David Roberts, who writes about energy and climate change for Vox. David, I really liked the piece and it made me think a lot. Lay out the sort of theory of the blitz as you understand it.
Sure. The idea is that, I sort of set it up in contrast to Obama's administration, who had this idea that he had a certain amount of political capital and he could elicit cooperation from Republicans by sort of moving slowly and deliberately, doing one thing at a time, taking plenty of time to negotiate, basically offering good faith attempts at cooperation. And what happened was he just got rope-a-doped again and again. And it became clear, I think it's especially clear now in retrospect, that there was never any intent to help him. It was all intended to waste time, because Mitch McConnell has recognized accurately, I think, that in hyperpolarized two-party politics, it really is a zero-sum game. And any victory that a Democratic president gets hurts Republicans. So Biden should assume that up front, I think. And if you need any more proof of what the right is now, I think the Trump years have cleared that up. And he should just take that on board and realize he's not going to get help. He's going to be confined to what he can do on his own, and he should just do it.
Now, part of that, I mean, do it is a little complicated, right? Because if there's a 50-50 Senate, which Democrats control, nominally, but they can't lose a single vote, or if Mitch McConnell controls the Senate, they can't just ram through legislation, right? So what does that mean in sort of real terms with the legislative bottlenecks there might be?
Honestly, my assumption has been that Democrats are unlikely to win these two Georgia runoffs, and thus Mitch McConnell is likely to be Senate Majority Leader, and thus that legislation is more or less off the table. I mean, that's my assumption, other than sort of these emergency spending bills that have to go through to keep the government running. But you're seeing now, they're already gearing up to worry about the deficit. They're already gearing up for opposition. So I think Joe Biden should already be thinking, what is the maximum freedom of motion I have? What is the maximum I can do without Congress, without legislation? And it turns out there is a lot. The presidency is extremely powerful, but I think in the past, Obama was leery about using that power too much, at least early in his administration, because he didn't want to flip out the right. He didn't want to sort of lose this cooperation he thought he might get. But if Joe Biden is clear-eyed about the fact that he's not going to get it, period, he can just start pulling those administrative levers the second he walks in the door.
And that's a really interesting idea, right? Because if you think, I think what Obama thought was there was a possibility of consensus. He also was waiting on that 60th vote in the Senate. He wanted to do these big legislative things. So it was a calculation. If you go in thinking I'm not getting, particularly if you don't win the runoffs, right? I'm not getting anything out of a McConnell Senate other than maybe avoiding shutdowns. Maybe.
Yeah. That's not certain.
There was, one of the things that's interesting in your piece, I think there has been an idea, and I think Joe Biden might have this idea because he served in the Senate for so long, that if you take these administrative actions that are provocative, you poison the well for whatever bipartisan comedy there might be. And your argument is there's none to be had, so you might as well do it.
the well is full of poison. I mean, what more proof do we need? I mean, what do we need to see? The last 10 years have been 100% consistent on the right. They have not deviated from the course of action for 10 years now. The only doubt that's ever been raised about what they're going to do next is from Democrats, who seem endlessly credulous about the next promise of cooperation. So the well is poisoned. That means what matters is the power you have and what you can do with it. And that should be Biden's overwhelming focus.
And the other thing that's really interesting is this idea of pacing, right? Like and this I think is a real interesting lesson of Trump, because there's obviously a lot of things he did horribly, terribly, like govern, but a certain way of hacking the news cycle. Because I think that one of the things that I've seen among Democratic politicians, this was true of Obama, was like they didn't want to make news. Right. Because if you're making news, then you've got controversy. If you've got controversy, then you're ebbing political capital. You're getting questions about it. And one of the ways that Trump hacked that was to make so much news. And you sort of think that can be a model. Like, if you do a lot of stuff, everyone's always chasing the last thing you did.
Right. And if you try not to make news, the sort of perverse outcome is you get the media really wanting to make news, right? They end up chasing every little thing. So if you wear, say, a tan suit, and there's a Republican willing to accuse you of treason for it, that'll be a 2 or 3 day story because there's nothing else. But what Trump did is just make news every 5 minutes. So, one scandal after another passed just because everybody was still busy sort of harumping and trying to understand it by the time the next one arrived. And so no one could make a real story out of any one of these things. And what I thought might be nice to try for once for Biden is to just do good things at the same pace so that the inevitable sort of Republicans are going to howl about this. There's going to be pundits in DC who scratch their chin and worry that he's not he's not reaching out enough. And there's going to be all the usual chatter in DC, but he can just ignore that stuff. And by the time a narrative settles or sort of congeals, he's on to the next thing, doing something else. So, let's try to use the news cycle the way Trump used it, for the forces of good, I guess, is my idea.